that way we can say a big warm welcome. We have another episode of The Becoming of Business right here. And I am so thrilled to have one of my favorite people with my favorite name, Ruth. Ruth Harper is here. And I can't wait to talk to you about everything relating to your job, which is to be a chief marketing and sustainability officer for ManpowerGroup globally. So we can talk about workforce. We can talk about what it means to be a professional. We're going to talk about the future. We're going to talk about your dream trajectory. And I can't wait. First, can you put yourself on the map for us so we understand a little bit what you do?
Linda, I am thrilled to be reunited with you, so thank you very much. And I love that you asked to put me on the map. I'm a former geography teacher, so I love anything to do with maps. But maybe we'll go there, or maybe we will not. Maybe that's another episode. I'm Ruth Harper. I'm Chief Marketing and Sustainability Officer here at ManpowerGroup. Here is Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But I am a Brit, and I am a Brit, but I've lived here in the US for almost 9 years, moved here with my two sons and my husband back then for a 3-year assignment. And here I still am, but I've been with the organization for 20-something years in UK, European, and global roles. And we're a talent organization. We put more than 2 million people into work every year, 600,000 people every day in 75 markets across almost every industry. And I'm really proud that that's our purpose, and that's also the work that we do every day, the work that our organization does every day. And that's my motivation for sure. So it's great, right, when you get the opportunity to do your job somewhere different and just keep developing within your role too. So that's a little bit about ManpowerGroup, headquartered in Milwaukee. And when you take a global role, we believe that we should bring talent to the city of Milwaukee. So when you take a global role, you move here. And I love Milwaukee, America's best kept secret.
How wonderful. And let's see how many people can actually point to Milwaukee on a map. I didn't know you were a geography teacher. I happen to love maps. I just want things. I always talk about mapping things out and having things on a map, and I want to put you on the map. Like, I want to know where you are. Like, just map. It's such a big symbol.
It grounds us. It gives us a sense of kind of literally of direction, which I think gives us a sense of identity, who we are, where we might be going, where we've come from, where might be next. I think maps, I'm with you. I would say, maybe 100 maps in my house of all kinds of types of art, and then traditional maps as well. I love a map. So I haven't shaken that love of geography off.
No, because it's a way of life. It's a way of understanding the world. I just love it. I knew we had more in common. So we're here today to talk about the evolution of business. And I can't wait to talk to specifically you about what we call the workforce, which is kind of an odd word, actually, but there we are, we call it a workforce. And we have all this talent that comes to work every day. And there are obviously big things happening in the trends in your field right now. And I thought that I would love for you to speak into that. And especially seeing that there are so many things that are changing, AI is now moving in a way. And I think that I'm not the only one who's surprised about which areas AI is actually taking over and making some part of the workforce and some professionals obsolete, or at least changing their contribution pretty radically. And so I think we're a little unsettled. Can you, and you don't have to put us at ease if that's not actually reality, but I would love to hear more about what's actually going on in the world of talent and workforce right now.
Linda, I love your point. So let's not forget it, but I love your point about being at ease, right? Because I think that's a really pertinent um, consideration for what's going on in the world of work right now, right? It's changing more rapidly than it's ever changed. It's always been changing, though, right? When we look back at the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, we've talked here at Manpower Group, we've talked for 15 years about technological revolution. So we're used to change, right? But maybe the pace is picking up. Maybe it's beginning to impact more individuals more frequently. So I think I would love to be putting you at ease. I think it's an organization, an employer, a manager, a leader's responsibility to find a way to put people at ease. Otherwise, we're going to really struggle to be our best selves when we go to work, right? Getting comfortable with change, getting comfortable with uncertainty, even, is a very empowering and necessary thing, I think, when we want to be able to perform as individuals or as organizations when we see the world transforming fast around us. And I think some of the trends that we're observing for sure are beginning to kind of reflect how some of this is playing out. One of the things that we're seeing happening, and we believe in a way that the pandemic has shone a light on the future of work. It showed us that you can do a 3-day week in the office, that you can do 4 days, 1 day remote, that you can work in a hybrid way. Adam Grant tells a lovely story that before the pandemic, how many CEOs he called and said, would you like to experiment and do this 4-day week? 99.9% of them said, forget it. That just sounds like it's doomed, right? Fast forward 6 months. And before we knew it, leaders are almost boasting about how fast they could go remote, how they could leverage their technology strategy and get work done almost unaffected, right? So my word, how the world changed overnight. So we've seen some of these trends beginning to play out. And as a result of that, what we would see now is, that workers, individuals, people are beginning to treat work as consumers, right? Just like they spend the rest of their life, they are also consuming work. I'm going to take my pick about the organization that I work for. I'm going to choose where or how I work to fit with the rest of my life that I've just spent the last 3 years appreciating in a very different way. And so this kind of consumerism being applied to work is beginning to play out. And that is massively amplified when somebody's got the skills that are most in demand by an organization. Skills are increasingly powerful for people to call the shots in terms of how they work, where they work, and how they get their work done. And the development of skills and the nurturing and the growing of skills is another tool in the armory, if you like, of an organization to attract and retain some of the best in an era where talent is at its most scarce, actually. We've talked about a talent shortage for 17 plus years. It just keeps getting significantly more of an issue to organizations, how you attract, how you retain, how you develop your talent so that you've got the skills that you need. So if there were one overarching trend, I guess, that we're seeing, it's one of the talent shortage for organizations. And when you turn it around and you think from a people first perspective, talent shortage is an issue to an individual if they don't know how to develop their skills, where to go to develop their skills, and what's going to be in demand tomorrow, next year, or the rest of their working life, right? And that, I believe, is a really long-winded way of saying, how do we help people be at ease with ongoing change? I think that's a bit of food for thought anyway to warm us up.
Absolutely. And when you look at these future projections of educating yourself and basically developing a talent, right, that can be utilized in the workforce, what we're seeing pretty soon is that it's going to be hard to even choose a major at university because things will be so different in 4 years that we don't even know exactly what to choose. So would you say that there are enough organizations or projects or something to support what that rapid talent change really is requiring for people? I mean, it's the people that will turn into talent. How is that an ecosystem that works today? What's going on there?
In some organizations, I would say yes, right? And by organizations, I'd almost be going right back to education too, because which subject do you choose? Which exams are you going to do? Which results do you need to select the college, the university, or the organization that you're going to go into? The red thread running through all of that would be around curiosity, right? Because what you study today might not be valid tomorrow, but if you develop the skills of curiosity, investigation, argument, deeper diving, influencing, how do you leverage the subject or the current role to be able to develop not just your technical knowledge or your technical skills, but also your soft skills or your human power, if you like, in terms of being able to continue to develop and build on those skills that you have, whether that skill is a learning skill because you're at college, or if it's your entry level skill because it's your first or your second job, but that kind of curiosity to want to build. And here at ManpowerGroup, we refer to that, we introduced this concept quite a few years ago, actually, that we refer to as learnability. And learnability is around the ability, but also the desire to want to keep on learning. And that's a really interesting concept, actually, because if the desire is not, doesn't matter how intelligent you are, right? But if the desire to develop your skills, to change what you do, to build on your capabilities, if the desire isn't there, then you're stuck, right? So that desire plus the ability is a really crucial combination to be able to carry on learning and developing your skills.
Yeah, and you're really singing my type of music here because, of course, in the leadership development that I do and working with companies to really work better together, it's also a cultural matter with the learning. So I come from the branding world, as you know, and so I was a branding CEO for a very long time before I switched gears about 10 years ago to do leadership and mind training. And so I've been doing a lot of developing the brand platform and the values with companies, and I was quite surprised already way back when that not more chose to have learning as one of their core values. But then it also turned out that learning in and of itself as a core value in an organization requires certain things from the organization. It requires a type of atmosphere, a culture, a type of team attitude where it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be vulnerable. Learning, because it's such an open-minded and I would argue open-hearted type of quest, it really needs a structure around it in order for people to even get that desire going for more learning. So it's both in the individual and in the structural. So I really appreciate you pointing that out as a means for us to once again be at ease in understanding that it's not just about hunting down the right education and the right programming or technical skills. It's actually about your way of showing up. And the who is showing up at work, and what does this who signify? Is that curiosity? Is that just attitude of collaboration, in which case you're probably going to do really, really well. So we're now sort of looking at how do we prepare talent. So you see that there are certain things that work well within certain organizations. What do you think? Where's the gap? Like, why do we still have talent shortage? Like, where can we improve in all of this?
That's a great question. Why do we still have a talent shortage when we've been talking about it for 15 years? I think because there's a gap between what we know and yet what we act on, right? Within an organization, within organizations far and wide across sectors, right? We can be wise and we can have the knowledge, but where's the action plan and how do we execute it? Which goes back to your kind of how do you do learning in an organization? And actually, I think what we saw is the trend of, many large organizations, especially, not exclusively, but especially, that would, launch their online university. Find me a corporate that doesn't have an online university. But at the same time, find us the results that say everything in there resonates with their people. The take up is 100% and they start and they finish, right? That just doesn't happen. And I think what became the next trend almost, once organizations realized that they needed to drive learning and development and upskilling within their organization, I think the realization also came that you actually have to unleash the desire in people to want to learn. And how do you do that, right? That's really hard. And I don't think that that's necessarily been mastered yet. So I think there's a bit of an answer to your question around talent shortage. But let me kind of give you an example of how I think we know that to be true. At Manpower, we have, in one of our brands, Manpower, we have our Manpower MyPath program, which is part of our upskilling offering for our associates, the people that we put into work. And one of the things that we do to encourage people to engage in our MyPath program is to have the organizations that we place them with, where they go to work, to have those organizations and those managers recognize the soft skills of those workers that go to work. It might be teamwork, it might be communication, it might be collaboration. And we have these 6 medals or badges that are awarded, and they are endorsed by their employer for those soft skills. And interestingly, it is those people that are endorsed for their soft skills that are 2 times more likely to want to engage in upskilling opportunities than those that are not. And I think what we're beginning to see through these trends over time is that when you recognize people's skills, you are more likely to unleash more learning or appetite for learning in them, not least when some of these people maybe didn't have a great experience in their first exposure to education, right? They don't have a good, positive relationship with their formal education earlier in life. But when you begin to demonstrate what education and learning and reskilling and upskilling can look like and feel like and can point to, back to the map and the journey ahead, and what the point of doing it is and where it might lead you, especially in a short period of time, you can really begin to kind of unleash that appetite in people to want to learn. And I think that's where we're beginning to see a difference really in terms of how you guide people to see the point in why you might do things differently, why you might consider reskilling, upskilling, and developing your own skill set.
It's so beautiful. And I'm thinking how wonderful it is that you have been able to measure the soft skills in a way where you can actually point to not only the soft skills and that they're recognized for them, because that means they have to be recognized and measured, right, in some fashion. And then that in turn also has implications for further growth. Can you speak a little bit more into that? And the reason I'm asking is that when I speak to business leaders about, let's call them soft skills, we know they pack a very hard punch, but let's still call them soft skills.
Right.
What I usually sort of get as a pushback is how impossible it is to measure them. It's so easy to measure money, it's so easy to measure time, whereas the soft skills as such are hard to quantify. What do you say to that?
I do think that's a really good question, and but I'm wondering. I'm struggling a little bit with the question of quantifying it, right? But can you recognize it? Do you see the impact of it? Do you see an outcome from it? And I think that's much easier than putting a number next to it. And I think that kind of performance needs to be looked at more at a manager level. One of the things that we've also heard talked about, I think, over the last decade is what the role of the middle manager is within an organization. And they've had some pretty kind of, I guess, unpleasant attack almost in terms of the role of the middle manager. Whether they're the ice in the middle, the clay in the middle, whatever in the middle that is the sticking point. I think the other realization, as we begin to adapt a more people-first approach to how we lead and how we manage, the role of the manager in recognizing those soft skills, encouraging those soft skills, modeling those soft skills as well, are way more impactful than is there a metric next to it? How do you quantify it? I would challenge the quantify to more, can you demonstrate it? Can you feel it? Can you see it? Because that's how you begin to see the behaviors that build teams, that drive outputs, and so on. And don't get me wrong, you can quantify some of these things in your people surveys, in your pulse surveys. Do you feel this? Do you see that? Does your manager give you this? Do you feel this about your peers? So you can quantify some of that in surveys, but I think behaviorally, how do you begin to see this play out in how your teams collaborate, how you retain your teams as well? I think some of the stuff that you've talked about already, Linda, is absolutely around culture, right? What do you want your culture to be? Because where are you trying to take your organization? If you're trying to create a more innovative organization, what are the behaviors that you would define that would help you start doing things this way and stop doing things that way? We've been through a process in recent years around how do we drive more innovative behaviors within our organization? What are the behaviors that we have today that we want to stop? What are the behaviors that we have today that we want to do more of? And what are the new behaviors that we need to introduce? And by surveying from the top of our organization and our leadership teams at an executive level, at a global level, right through to our employees across the whole organization, we came to a really clear place that said, look, to be more innovative, we say we are collaborative, we need to have more collaboration. We'll keep building on that strength and that behavior. But what we also need is to be more anti-slow in how we get things done. And that doesn't mean fast. It means having a process that is repeatable, that is predictable, that people feel comfortable with and can do to be able to move more speedily in the long term, right? And then actually, how do we also get closer to being consistently more innovative? By being courageous in our risk-taking. So through collaboration, anti-slow, and courageous risk-taking, we all begin to move in the same direction, even use the same language, right? It gives you a lexicon. Sorry, the light goes out after a certain, it's so sustainable. But, by using the three, the same three words when we talk about our culture, to be collaborative, to be anti-slow, to be courageous in our risk-taking, gives us a shared language across the organization, across teams, across functions, across levels within the organization that allows us actually to call out one another's behaviors. I think we could be more anti-slow or in the interests of collaboration. It begins to give us a language that allows us to call one another out and also to encourage better behaviors. So that culture piece, I think, begins to be another one of those demonstrations of how we begin to recognize these soft skills across our organization and really value them.
And I think all of what you said now is so encouraging and so inspiring in that we can get so lost in the weeds about fitting soft skills into business and the business metrics that we are used to with the KPIs and the measurements and et cetera. And there is a bigger sense of an organization. And that's really what you're demanding is a more elevated type of idea of what it means to run an organization and to have everybody be on board. I love your words, courageous risk-taking. I'm just thinking about how you chose the word courageous instead of brave, seeing that courageous actually means bravery from the heart. So it's important to recognize that the heart, the cur piece is in there. And anti-slow, I have to admit, is the first time I ever heard anti-slow. Loving that. And what I think you're doing is really demonstrating for a lot of organizations how to tackle what could be a scary scenario with AI coming in and taking over types of functions and roles and jobs that we didn't think before would be impacted by AI. And if you are as aware as you are in looking at this, then you can foster the type of soft skills that AI never can rival. It will never be. I mean, and I say never in, at least not in the next 100 years. And that's another thing that we were talking about previously, you and I, Ruth, is the time perspective of business. And what have you learned from your sustainability foot that you're standing on when you look at the marketing and business piece? Is there anything there that you want to point out?
Yes. I mean, so much to think about when you think about timescales, right? And maybe it's because we're all getting a little older. And I know I've celebrated a significant birthday this year, but I love your kind of thought-provoking point around, the time frame piece. Should we be thinking about 5 years' time or 10 years' time as leaders? Should we be thinking about 50 or 100 years' time? Like, what is the definition of a vision? But to me, the vision is still about where are we going? Where are we going and how long do we think it might take us to get there? And, I really like to think in a kind of what if scenario. What if we thought about how we might get not just 2 million people into work every year, but 3 million or 5 million? And if that's our vision, how do we work back from that? And I'll give you an example with my ESG hat on, right, as the Chief Sustainability Officer. One of the most exciting things that I feel our organization has achieved is the first in our industry to be validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative to really be able to demonstrate we have a plan to be able to get to net zero emissions by 2045 or sooner. And just for the record, or sooner is in double the font size than they're getting to 2045, right? Because I
love
believe
that.
we can have a process and we can have a plan and we will be anti-slow in getting to our 2045 target. But I'm excited for a couple of reasons. We're the first in our industry to be validated by the SBTi. We've put planet on the map in a professional organization, and many professional organizations would say, hey, look, the environment hasn't mattered that much to us in the past because we're not a great emitter. We're not manufacturing. We're not energy. But we've put planet on the agenda for our organization with a clear climate goal. And most importantly, back to this time frame piece, we have a plan when we will do it. But we have worked back from that plan, and this is why it's validated externally, because we have an annual goal to say, we know what the 5 levers are that we need to work out to be able to reduce the emissions in our key markets year on year, and we'll track that, we'll report on that. And this is what we mean when we say, hey, we're not just about pledges. Pledges might be important to rally your organization, to get your message clearly and concisely out there. But what is more important than a pledge is the progress that you report on to be able to actually reach that goal. And that's one of the most exciting things that in my 20 years with the organization, I feel thrilled to have been part and to lead a team that is able to kind of make that commitment, but lay out that plan. And I think that this space around climate and environmental pledges and reaching net zero is a really great example of it's been many years that since the Paris Accord, since 10, 15 years ago, that increasingly organizations are beginning to make these pledges, right? It's only very recently, I would say, that organizations are being held to account on what progress you're making. And I think this is a great example of where we're seeing leadership being held to account to say, but what's your plan to get there? And I think there are not many organizations that cannot have a plan. There are not many organizations that can get away with not having a plan on how to reach net zero. You might not even pursue an RFP if you don't have a net zero goal and a plan to go with it. So one organization is holding another organization to account to be able to make impact at scale and progress at scale. And I think that's how leaders are also beginning to realize this is not in the long distance. This is not in the long grass. This accountability is from one year to the next. And it might be my client, it might be my customer. And I think increasingly it's our employees who are holding us to account that expect us to be able to make progress. If we say we're going to put 10,000 refugees into work, can you tell us every year where and how and what kind of jobs and what kind of upskilling we're providing these people with to really deliver on these commitments that, we shout out loud and proud, but we've got to be able to demonstrate that we make the incremental progress. We've got to be able to demonstrate that sometimes we haven't made the progress that we thought that we would make in a 12 or a 24-month period. So my word, we need to really kind of dig deep, knuckle down, and accelerate in this space or in that space. Otherwise, those 2030 goals, those 2045 goals just seem less and less achievable. I think what we've learned on environment, we have to get really clear at applying to the S of ESG as well. We took too long to lay out these goals and hold ourselves accountable on the environment. And that's why we have the panic of COP28, the panic that we'll see next year at COP29 and so on, right? As we rightly fret about reaching 1.5 degrees. We should not allow ourselves to be in the same situation on social impact, right? We have to act faster. We have to set goals. We have to report on the goals. And we have to hold one another accountable. Otherwise, in 30 years' time, we'll be wondering why we have a polarized society, we have too many people left behind, not enough people who have upskilled, and somebody else sitting here telling you that this is the 35th year of talent shortage, right?
That's exactly right. And also think about the complexity of the current world where, climate change is also causing new types of refugees and new types of shakeups on the map and in the landscape of workforce and people living and just trying to make a living. And so
Exactly.
all of this is just so thank you for this perspective. And I love how you've really married this long-term timeline that usually comes as a pledge from the environmental work that we do, but that's just the one component, and that really does very little if you don't marry that with the short-term measurable, where are we, the accountability, the plan, and if you combine that in turn with a learning culture, you can actually apply the curiosity and the collaboration and all these things that seem to be so prevalent in your culture. And what I'm also hearing is that you are seeing that being successful with the thousands of different companies that you work with in turn.
And, so how do we learn ourselves as organizations, right, to build on what we've practiced on climate and environmental impact and apply that to social impact? And one of the things that we've just rolled out in this year's ESG report from ManpowerGroup, our Working to Change the World plan that we push out annually, where we both report on our numbers and we provide the data, but we also tell the stories that give the examples of where and how we're making impact. We've just published this year's report, and one of the things that we're trying to share is this idea that is completely stolen from the environmental impact and the metrics of the environment: scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. What if we apply that to social impact? So if scope 1 is your direct impact, what are you doing for your employees then in relation to social impact? If scope 2 is your indirect impact, what are you doing for your customers and your clients to drive social impact? And if scope 3 is your partnerships, your supply chain, and the wider community in which you operate, what are you doing with them on social impact? And sometimes, back to our point about quantifying, sometimes it isn't a number, right? It's an activity or it's engagement. And so, getting all of our data points to be supported by our stories and our narrative, if you like, is, I think, how we not just attract talent, but we motivate talent to be a part of some of these solutions related to scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 of the environment, or indeed of social impact as well. So we're kind of trying to learn from what took us so long on the environment to help us accelerate the impact that we might make on social impact. And for us here, it's always through a people-first lens. How do we drive social impact? For us, it's about creating talent at scale. So that's the answer to the talent shortage. We either find the talent that already exists, the skills that are already out there, we define them, we find them, and if we can't, we've got to create them, right? Whether that's through our upskilling and our MyPath program, whether that's through our Experience Academies and developing people's IT skills. So it's about being creators of talent at scale, and it's about creating meaningful work for all. And that addresses the DEIB, the diversity piece, because this is about work for all, but it's also meaningful, which is around how is this sustainable for the individual for the long term? How do they find work now? How do we point them to the next job? How do we help them figure out how they earn more? And how do we take them from a job that actually might be in decline into a role that's going to grow, where there'll be more demand for those skills? And individuals are not, they're not set up to know that themselves. They need guidance to be able to do that. And I think the other thing that we've learned, back to the education point, is people don't like to think about the long term. They don't want to think about a 3-year or a 4-year college degree to be able to change their trajectory. So to be able to point people to either on-the-job learning or shorter-term micro courses is way more likely to motivate that person's learnability or unleash their learnability than, hey, go do a 4-year college degree. And interestingly, I think one of the other things that we're beginning to see, actually led by the technology industry, is the shift away from these 4-year college degrees, right? And and much more leaning towards actual skills on the job today, and of course the ability to carry on learning, because in technology there is going to be a faster shift in terms of what kind of skills are needed, how fast they become obsolete. So that soft skill around being able to work in teams, being able to develop your learnability, being curious, as well as, C++, Java, whatever it is, and even being an expert in Gen AI as well, need to be married with the soft skills to be able to just keep being comfortable with change, being at ease with change.
Again, it's music to my ears, because you know how much I work with the soft skills. Again, they pack a very hard punch, and to have the type of mind skill and to understand that the identity that we've had for a long time as professionals are actually things that our brain can do that also AI can do now. And that's a huge shift in the way that we define ourselves as a good professional or a valuable professional. And this will have ramifications for leadership, management, and professional mental health for sure, because of that identity crisis. And the good news in all of that is that there are so many other parts of our mind. We're not just living in our left hemisphere of the neocortex, which is really what AI is coming in and saying, oh, I can do all of that much better than you can and much faster, right? So I think that there's so much to be said about the trajectory pointing to, if we are open-minded, curious, if we are open-hearted, if we're courageous like that, we have I can't see that we don't stand a chance making this a much, much greater talent pool. And it just seems like evolution does what it does, right? And we're here, and our job is to offer the types of choices for evolution that makes us deepen our collaboration. Because as Dr. Kurt Johnson has reminded us in this series, it is not actually the definition of the survival of the fittest has actually not to do with being the best. That's not what fittest means. Since 2015, we know now that is actually the ability to collaborate. So the survival of those who best collaborate is really what evolution is telling us. And that's all what you're doing and what you're working on. And it's so good.
Yeah, it might not be as catchy, but it's way more meaningful. And, and in the same vein, Linda, it won't be AI that takes our jobs. It will be people who can use AI that will take our jobs,
there
right? So back to people first, and curiosity, and open-mindedness, and a little bit of courage to get out of your comfort zone.
That's right.
Is what gives us the edge, right?
Yeah. So where in the world can we find out more about not only your organization, but these wonderful reports that you give out?
You can find those in our social media. You can find them when I'm organized. You can find them on my LinkedIn. You can find them on ManpowerGroup.com. So all of this is public, right? All of this is stuff that we do quarterly research where we're asking hirers about their hiring intentions so we can see where the demand is across 44 countries.
Wow.
We talk to workers on a regular basis, a few times a year, so that we know what workers want, not just what organizations want. And there's a really interesting comparison in terms of what that employer relationship might look like, but what an employee is seeking. And I think that's where we're also seeing quite a gap. And so understanding what workers want, how workers want to work. I think an interesting finding that we shared an awful lot through and since the pandemic was we talked so much about hybrid work and should people be in the office 3 days a week, 5 days a week, never, whatever. 60% of the workforce across the world never stopped going to the workplace in the pandemic. And here were we with our white collar privilege, right, pontificating about 3 days, 3.5 days, 4 days. And what we heard from our What Workers Want research was what matters most to those essential workers, those workers that are going into retail or manufacturing or R&D or hospitality or medical jobs, that the thing that was most meaningful to them was actually the start and end time of their shift. And if they could have flexibility around the time they started and the time they left, that was what was going to change their day to day, not am I in the office or am I out?
Uh-huh.
And what a difference that was going to make, that flexibility was going to make to their home life, to their anxiety levels, to their ability to parent, to their relationships, to their mental and physical wellness. That tiny increment, we didn't know about that. We were too busy talking about 3 days or 4 days or 5 days, right? But the organizations that say, how about a 5-hour shift instead of a 7-hour shift? How about you start at 10 or you can come in anywhere between 10 and 10:30 instead of I need you in at 8? It's those organizations that are retaining in-demand talent. And yet the shift is so simple, right? But you only know about it if you asked about it.
That's wonderful. And what a rich resource for people to go check out, because we do get very stuck in our own ways. And something that's so interesting from a psychological point of view is what happens when we're faced with a lot of change. Then we go to our known behaviors, right? And this is a challenge that we've spoken about previously. And this goes also for leaders. And so we need to make sure that we don't fall into our old conditioning, especially when a lot of changes are happening, which means that there's a level of fear in us, and then we go and revert to what we know. And that is a prime example, the one you just gave, of something where we can actually look again. We can change our minds, and I love that. Before we part today, I just wanted to see if there's anything else that you would like to put in this space when we're talking about the evolution of business. Anything else that you've been thinking about for us to ponder?
I'll tell you what you helped me to think about when we exchanged and we said, let's have a conversation. You know, when you talk about vision, it really, I love that kind of taking the time to remind ourselves to be clear about our vision, right? And every year we put 2 million people into work at our organization across 75 markets. When you think about, when you helped me think about vision, I like to think in this kind of what if scenario. Well, what if we put more people into work? Is that the definition of success? So what if we put more people into work, 3 million people into work, 5 million people into work? What if we help more people be confident and more comfortable with the changing world of work, so that they are more open-minded to learning, more open-minded to change, more mobile in how they move around the labour market, right? What if we got more women into work? What if we found a way to get more of the marginalised people in society back into work, whether it's refugees, whether it's older workers returning, you know, whether it's people with disabilities? But what if we could get more underrepresented people into work? You know, what if the working week was no longer 40 hours, but it was 20 hours or 30 hours, so that we get more people into the labour market, but they have more life to live as well while they go to work, you know. So I love this kind of idea of what if, and you've kind of left me with that, just as we get, you know, as we run up to a holiday or as we run up to time off. I love this kind of challenge from you that I'll take with me, and maybe others will listening to this. What if we think about our vision and we ask our what if? And it might be vast, or it might be a tiny incremental change, like, what if we start at 8:30? What if we tell people they can come in at 9 o'clock? what difference does that make if they get to do the school run or they get to work out? So some I guess I love your challenge back to kind of what's the vision, and how often do we keep going back and revisiting our vision, right? How often do we talk to other people about our vision to get that outside in approach as well? So thank you, Linda, for some of these questions that you've posed to me and to the audience here as well.
Oh, thank you so much. And we are inspired by your big what ifs. It's such a brilliant way of framing really taking yourself to the next step of the vision. Loving that. And in closing, just a reminder that when we look at some of the biggest innovations and biggest sort of genius stuff that's ever come out of people, it's not that someone has done something extremely different. They've done one little thing differently. It's usually just the one little thing differently. And so if we can just look at and take these, not get overwhelmed, but take these little steps and say, okay, we're going to turn on the switch for collaboration. Let's just see. Let's see what that does to our process. And we've gotten so many great ideas from you today. And I feel richer knowing so much more about what's going on in the labor force around the world. And even more so, actually culturally, what Manpower is committed to doing is actually what has inspired me the most in this conversation. And as always, you're very, very inspirational to speak with. And I want to thank you so much for coming here. And again, we are talking with Ruth Harper, and she is the Chief Marketing and Sustainability Officer globally at ManpowerGroup, and we can find her and all this beautiful work at ManpowerGroup.com?
Correct.
Yeah, at ManpowerGroup.com. Thank you so much for your time, Ruth.
Linda, thank you. That was great.